truth is the most convincing story that maps onto reality, and that's why the central narrative is falling apart.
Right now in the United States, people should not be walking around with masks.
We must see the central narrative for the fiction that it is. We are Americans.
While elections are sometimes messy, this was a secure election.
The founders began the fight for human liberty and self-governance, and it's up to us to finish the job.
I'll tell you what, we are in a truth emergency right now.
This is the end game.
It's Wednesday, September 25th, 2024, the 1,344th day of dystopia. I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Let's be reasonable. A warm welcome and hello to all of you listening through a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can become a paid subscriber for as little as $50 a year or $5 a month. And in doing so, you'll get the ad-free experience. You'll be able to participate in the conversation over on Substack, and you'll be invited to the interactive live stream every Wednesday afternoon. And if you can't or you simply don't want to, continue listening to the free version on Substack, a wide variety of podcast platforms, and of course, Rumble. All I ask is that you share it with your friends. You can find the links to the podcast, the writing, the social media, and the merch site by visiting linktree.com/I'mYourModerator. Okay, so today is Wednesday, and I did the interactive live stream for paid subscribers as I do each Wednesday. But I'm going to make that live stream available for everyone to see. You are about to hear the audio from that live stream on this podcast. But if you would like to watch the video, the link to the video on Rumble will be in the show notes for this podcast episode. Or just go to rumble.com and find I'm Your Moderator. And Rumble seems to be, by the way, a pretty stable, free speech-oriented platform. So it makes sense to familiarize yourself with the site and the app, and then make sure you're following your favorite content creators in case there is any disruption on other platforms. So here's the show. If you prefer to watch, like I said, check it out over on Rumble. And if you like what you hear, please consider supporting the show.
Immensely seductive. Quite sure he's right. Obsessionally neurotic. Pretty dangerous, in fact.
Do you mean you doubt your powers to convince him?
Worse than that. What I'm afraid of is his power to convince me.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories.
Sweetheart, be reasonable.
Welcome to the Wednesday live stream. Here we are once again. I want to play another movie clip at the start, and then we're going to go through some interesting stuff today. I want to talk about, it seems like the regime is at the point where they're about to admit that all elections are stolen. And I think that would be one of the sorts of things, fucking grammar, you know, that would cause them to potentially cancel the charade of this fake election that we are told to expect. And then I want to talk about Trump's civil RICO trial against Hillary Clinton and all her associates. I have been referring to this thing as RICO Grande for years. We were told it was dismissed. I was like, it's not dismissed. This thing is still what it is. This is the whole story. This is the major axe blow to the deep state. It encompasses everything. And I think that the special counsel investigations all flow into RICO Grande. And so we're going to go have a retrospective of RICO Grande as that comes back into the news. Man, there's a lot of stuff dropping. Burning Bright and I, on our show Badlands Story Hour that we do over on Badlands Media, last night talked about the film Parallax View, starring Warren Beatty from 1974, so 50 years old. And it's about political assassinations and their cover-ups and how these are all kind of orchestrated from behind. They create patsies. And so I think that was, I proposed this film on purpose because I knew we were dealing with assassination stuff. I didn't know how much more ridiculous, obviously, the Ryan Routh story was going to get and how much it was going to build outwardly ridiculous, more ridiculous at every level. But, you know, we try to, or at least I can't speak for his choices, but I try to time films based on how I think they'll align with what we're going to see over the coming weeks or what we're dealing with at a given time. And so we watched Parallax View, and it has this one scene right at the beginning, and it's actually bookended with this scene. Very similar scenes right at the beginning, right at the end, where a government panel lets everyone know that, don't worry, there are no conspiracies.
Now, this is an announcement, not a press conference. Therefore, there will be no questions. A complete transcript of the investigation is being prepared for publication on March 1st. At that time, the committee will hold a full-scale press conference. After nearly 4 months of investigation, followed by 9 weeks of hearings, it is the conclusion of this committee that Senator Carroll was assassinated by Thomas Richard Linder. It is our further conclusion that he acted entirely alone, motivated by a misguided sense of patriotism and a psychotic desire for public recognition. The committee wishes to emphasize that there is no evidence of any wider conspiracy. No evidence whatsoever. Now, it's our hope that this will put an end to the kind of irresponsible and exploitive speculation conducted by the press in recent months. As I've said, the complete text of the hearings, which provides the basis for the committee's findings, will be published March 1st. When you have had a chance to examine the evidence, you will have every opportunity to ask those questions which remain unanswered, if there are any. That is all. Thank you.
All right. So, very typical. This is what we are accustomed to hearing. This is how we're accustomed to be treated. The government will let us know what it is we are to think. There will be no questions asked, at least not right now. Someday, we will let you ask questions. Right now, we're going to let you argue about what we've told you to believe until you decide what version of that you believe, and then we will use that version to answer your questions sometime in the future. Will you get the truth? No. Why? Because there isn't one. Is that impossible to believe? Better let go of that idea. Maybe there is some underlying truth beneath all of this, and it may well be inaccessible. And it's very, very strange. We're in a strange period right now where there are elements of fakery coming now clearly from our side that if they are just to wake up the normies, they are really going the distance to wake up these normies, or possibly they are adhering to a pre-planned schedule and people are able to see through it all far better than they planned. I hope that's the case, because if that is the case, then the intent is to actually get people to see through it, which means at some point, once the blinders generally come down for enough of the public, then you would expect them to step forward and admit that they have tried to bring everyone successfully out of the psyop that they were brought into over the course of decades. And then people can make their own moral judgments about who the good guys and who the bad guys are. That's got to be how this winds down if it's not evil. If it doesn't wind down that way, people should be concerned that we are only switching from one brand of liars to another. That's not a good way to continue on into the future, and I don't think that's going to be accepted by a great portion of the truth community, and maybe ultimately everybody, because what it is that's kind of holding the anger and frustration at bay for a lot of people is the understanding that a plan is actually being enacted and carried out here. There is some intention behind what we're seeing, and that intention, while not always able to kind of exhibit itself in the world as something good, is coming from a pure place, let's say, right? There are some things that have, some stories that have had to be told over the years that have caused some people to make some very, very bad decisions that were detrimental to their lives. Is that acceptable as collateral damage if we indeed get out of this thing? And if no one's going to ever cop to, yes, we psyoped you, to unpsyop you, it's hard to see how we didn't move from one brand of liars to another. And I would say that I'm fearful of very few things in this process, but that one I do find to be unsettling. I wouldn't say I'm afraid of it. I mean, we're just going to keep on going either way. There's no other choice. But that would be very unsettling. Like if, for instance, following the fake election, assuming one happens, there's no change in the standard for censorship, and it's just allowed to go on like this, and the worst people on earth are promoted while other people are silenced by the same platforms promoting them, and they're not encouraging people to seek truth elsewhere. They're just importing whatever is necessary from that outer land and then bringing it into the mainstream as some kind of limited hangout. That would be a very bad indication of what some of the intent behind some of this is. And that doesn't mean that everybody involved would then be bad, or that Trump would be bad, or anything like that. It would mean that the job's not done and that there are yet to be more betrayals on our side. And I think that that's always been the case. We should always understand that there will be more betrayals to come. But yeah, that's an unsettling one. All right. So I want to talk. I mentioned that it seemed like maybe they were beginning to tell us a little bit about exactly the true state of our elections is. And my friend Brian Lupo, who you better know as CanCon, sent me this podcast yesterday, texted it over to me. I just listened to it this morning. It is Philip Stark. Now, let me pull up Philip Stark just so you can have an idea of what his bio is and what projects he's worked on. What election integrity efforts has Philip Stark been involved with? And I'm going to toss that into the old Perplexity AI, and which is what I've said this before. I basically use this AI as my jumping off point and search engine. There are ways to ask AIs questions, and if you understand that they are programmed to do certain things and respond in certain ways, if you're able to adhere to clear and consistent logic and you are able to force the machine to do it, you will at least get better information than you would from a search engine. And you do have to force the machine to do it. You have to say, that's actually a logical fallacy. Or why are you protecting that particular viewpoint? I'm asking you for the counter to that. If you're able to ask AIs questions, apparently, or not apparently, but you're able to break through some of the problems with their programming and their algorithms. Philip Stark, a statistics professor at UC Berkeley, has been significantly involved in election integrity efforts, particularly in developing and promoting risk-limiting audits. Here are key aspects of his work in this area. So they go through the features of risk limiting audits here. Risk limiting audits are by no means good enough. Watch. So what are the criticisms of risk limiting audits? While risk-limiting audits are generally considered a robust method for verifying election results, they do face some criticisms and challenges. Now, why are risk-limiting audits generally considered a robust method for verifying election results? Because the TV says so. There's no other reason why anyone in reality would trust this process. The risk-limiting audits can be complex to implement, especially for election officials who are not familiar with the statistical methods involved. The complexity may lead to difficulty in explaining the process to the public, challenges in training staff to conduct the audits properly, potential for errors if not executed correctly. Okay, so that's already too many problems. The only kind of audit you should need in an election is to count all the votes over and over again. If they're all real, lawful American votes and they are consistently counted to the same results, well, I think you've probably got a right answer. This stuff is nonsense. Conducting RLAs can be resource intensive in several ways. RLAs may require significant time to complete, especially for close races. Trained staff are needed. There may be additional expenses. Well, they're not more than the machine voting process in the first place, which is the biggest expense. So do away with that and just hire day workers. This stuff is nuts. RLAs typically focus on specific contests rather than the entire election. Oh no. So it's not really audited when they say they audited it. They may not detect problems in races or ballot measures that are not audited. The selection of which contests to audit could be controversial. And hold on. Let me just see. They don't also do them at all locations either. They're just like, yeah, our systems generally worked. RLAs typically focus on specific contests rather than the entire election. That's what we just went through. Ballot handling concerns. The process of retrieving and handling individual ballots for auditing can raise issues, potential for accidental ballot or ballot damage or loss, privacy concerns if ballot selections can be tied to individual voters. Again, secret elections shouldn't be happening in the first place. So that is a ridiculous concern. That's just another thing they use to prevent anyone from ever accessing the ballots. In many elections, there is no actual real ballot to ever attach to in the first place. There is a receipt that the machine creates and spits out, often with a QR code. Some RLA methods rely on specific voting system capabilities. Not all voting systems may be compatible with the most efficient RLA methods. Upgrading voting systems to support RLAs can be expensive. It may lead to skepticism or mistrust if not properly explained, and there's no way to properly explain them that would actually convince people they work. So they improperly explain them, and then the public is confused, but is then told over and over and over again, yes, we audited that. That confusion is a feature, not a bug. They want that confusion because that's the only way they can get away with this sort of thing. And it's so great that Philip Stark created it. Could be seen as less transparent than full hand recounts. Well, there you go. I mean, that's it right there. Of course, it's less transparent. It's fake. It's designed to protect a fraud-based system. In very close races, RLAs may end up requiring a full hand count. So there's that. This could negate the efficiency benefits of the audit. There is no efficiency benefit of the audit, except that it gets legal situations handled much more quickly for people involved in the election fraud apparatus. RLAs are typically conducted after initial results are announced. This could lead to public confusion. There may be a time pressure to complete audits. So while these criticisms exist, many election experts still consider RLAs to be a valuable tool for ensuring election integrity when properly implemented and explained to the public. many election experts still consider. Despite all of these problems, many election experts still consider these to be a valuable tool for ensuring election integrity. No, these are a valuable tool for telling the public that election integrity work has been done when it has not. This is part of the cover-up. The idea that many election experts is some sort of conclusive story about these audits is crazy. So let's get into what Philip Stark is actually saying to a man. I don't know where he found this person. Apparently, actually, let me see if I can find this on YouTube. Apparently, there's this character named Ian Masters who hosts a podcast and puts it on SoundCloud. And SoundCloud had a moment, 10 years ago, where there were a lot of independent musicians releasing their work on SoundCloud. And it was kind of one of those early hubs. You would discover new artists there. And then bigger platforms came in, platforms like Spotify, other platforms came in, and they kind of just got all that business. However that was accomplished. Spotify is clearly a regime-linked organization and a very, very bad one at that. I'm trying to see if I can get this Stark interview on YouTube. Maybe there's a video version of this. Oh, well, there is one on YouTube, but it looks like it's just a still background of this man, Ian Masters. So Ian Masters is the sort of commie who believes everything he hears on MSNBC. And you'll see exactly what I mean. This is kind of amazing. He is concerned. He has election systems expert, risk limiting audit inventor, I guess, statistics professor from Berkeley, UC Berkeley, Philip Stark, on his podcast. He is concerned that Donald Trump is going to steal the election, and wait till you hear how. And this whole interview is less than 19 minutes long. We're not going to go through the whole thing, but I want to go through some chunks of this because I think that this is interesting to hear. You could pass this off to a liberal, like if you could smuggle it through another liberal. Hey, you should listen to this and then send it over to Dave. I think maybe you guys might understand some things about this. And then the first person listens to it and they're like, okay, well, maybe Dave would respond to this because these guys believe Trump is about to steal the election. Listen to this. We're going to go in like little couple minute chunks and then we'll pause and whatever.
So, Philip, just yesterday, the New York Times Siena poll came out and has Trump ahead in Georgia, Arizona, and North Carolina. I think yesterday I misspoke. I thought it was Michigan, but it was North Carolina. So given that the Republicans already have the software for the election machines in Georgia, does that mean that even he's ahead in the polls, that's kind of immaterial? They can determine their own results, can't they? So does that mean that the Democrats really don't have a prayer of winning Georgia?
Well, there's a lot to unpack in that question.
First off, I love how he just immediately says there's a lot to unpack in that question. So Ian Masters, the interviewer, just loaded all of the most extreme commie view of the central narrative into that question. They've stolen the election software in this handful of states. Are they going to steal our elections with the machines? He has already accepted, just right off the bat, the claim that all of these people have denied since 2020 that we've been saying, hey, yeah, those machines don't work. He thinks the software was just fine the whole time, but Republicans have stolen it. And how do they steal it, by the way? In court, apparently. Oh, and then he mentions later Tina Peters. But the idea that their proprietary software is unavailable to the Uniparty, it's so funny. And they don't understand the Uniparty at all. Listen to Philip Stark. Here we go.
One has to do with how predictive the polls are of how people actually vote when they show up. Statistical methods are pretty good at estimating, what fraction of people would say that they would vote a given way based on a sample of people surveyed. The problem is it's very difficult to predict who's actually going to turn up on election day and vote, or who's going to cast a ballot in either early or on election day. That's really sort of the black art of election polling, and it is sort of more an art than a science. So I don't put an enormous amount of weight in those polls because they can't really do a very good job of that second step of who's going to show up and actually cast a vote.
So right there, that's good. The polls are nonsense. Philip Stark, just straightforward about that, massaging it for this commie who obviously lives his life for these polls, and is convinced that he's wish casting a Kamala Harris win. You can hear it in his voice. You can hear it in his arguments. This is somebody who's he sounds like he's on the verge of cracking, really. And you'll get that impression as we go on. But good answer.
Clearly, these races are tight, and a lot of things could change between now and election day.
How is it clear that the race is tight if you are not paying attention to the polls? So this is one of those commie things to do, is know that a source of information is wrong. And actually, to be fair, there are far too many people in the truth community who operate this way as well. You know the source of information is bad, but yet you're going to refer to it anyway because it's the best you've got to go on. Now, is there anything to be gained from polling? Potentially, if you know that the same methods are adhered to and you can watch the directionality of something over time. It is never a good measure of what people actually think. And we discussed plenty of this yesterday. And of course, Philip Stark knows these things. So I don't know where he gets the idea that it's a close race. There's nothing in reality that could possibly tell you it's a close race. They've been censoring and propagandizing Americans for years. They've lied about enormous geopolitical issues and social issues. People are coming to understand that the entire social agenda is bullshit. The climate agenda is bullshit. A lot of what they've been told by the regime is bullshit. At the same time, they are trying to prosecute Donald Trump and imprison him in every way they can imagine after 2 impeachments, after the Russia hoax, all of these things. And we're still told it's a close race. If that's true, then your candidates must be so atrocious if Donald Trump is that bad and it's a close race and you're doing all those things. So, of course, it's not a close race. And if they replaced Donald Trump with someone who is not hated the way Donald Trump is, what would they say? It's a close race. They would still pretend it's a close race because what they need is for it to be a close race. They can't let people know, oh, yeah, actually, Trump was the problem. This new Republican that people put in, well, this guy's winning 90-10. That's never going to happen. They're going to say it's a close race no matter who's running because that's the only way the uniparty keeps functioning. If everyone knows that no one agrees with this shit, the system spirals to its inevitable conclusion. And so we prop the system up by agreeing with these premises in the first place. It is nuts. It's got to be stopped.
And a lot of things could go wrong that would basically stop the election in its tracks or create, fear, uncertainty, and doubt about the outcome and result in something other than just a simple tally of the votes cast by eligible voters being what determines the outcome of the contest. So the fact that the software for the voting machines in Georgia has been made available illegally to any number of parties makes it easier both to alter the results electronically, to insert malware onto these machines, to promulgate malware across different devices and actually alter votes. But it also makes it easier simply to cast doubt on the election by pointing to flaws in the software, whether those flaws are real or imagined. So I think that it's just a bad recipe for election integrity.
All right. Now, that's not all good and all correct. Okay. The fact that, quote unquote, Republicans have gotten the software is not what compromises these machines. These machines, in their optimal state with no compromise by Republicans, are incapable of producing a legitimate result. And you have to think that Philip Stark must have read the J. Alex Halderman report. He knows this. He knows what Harry Hursty is doing. He's seen some of these examples. He probably saw J. Alex Halderman hack into a poll pad, like with a pencil, I think it was. Harry Hursty, by the way, is on the Patrick Bet-David podcast talking about how machines are vulnerable. Not going all the way, of course. He's saying that, these machines, that's why they're not used anymore, because it was this easy to get into them. Well, they're all still that easy to get into. And he ignores that. If Harry Hursty is going on Patrick Bet-David's podcast, Harry Hursty was in the Kill Chain documentary, the HBO documentary that talks about how vulnerable and open to manipulation our voting machines and our election systems are. That is a documentary featuring Kamala Harris and Amy Klobuchar. It's like from 2018. And they had Halderman actually testifying in Congress. And it's in that video or that movie. And so Harry Hursty is now on a relatively mainstream podcast, Patrick Bet-David's podcast. So this is an info op. They have decided this is the time to let people know that actually, the election system is totally corrupted. And there's no way to know if Joe Biden actually won now. This is where we are headed. The systems are totally corrupted. And Philip Stark is pretending that that's not it. Now, is he running it up? Is this supposed to be some kind of good, slow disclosure thing? We can always give people the benefit of the doubt, okay? My goal here is not to cast aspersions on Philip Stark, but I watched him operate in the aftermath of the election up in New Hampshire and elsewhere. I have no trust whatsoever in this person, and he's giving further reasons not to trust. He's allowing this clearly delusional podcast host to hold on to those delusions. I mean, the Republicans have stolen the software, so now the systems are vulnerable. That's not the sort of thing, as an elections expert and a very responsible person, you should just allow to hang out there. Like, there's got to be pushback on that, and there was none, which is unfortunate. Hold on, let me see I don't want to take the entire show up with this, and I'm concerned that it's possible that I could. There's just so much, man. So let's do one more section, then we'll skip ahead.
But why do the Democrats why isn't their hair on fire? I don't understand why they're not protesting. Why would you enter a race that's rigged?
Isn't that amazing? He now understands that the election system is corrupted, and he says, why aren't the Democrats protesting? Why isn't their hair on fire? Why would you enter an election system that's rigged? Great point, Ian Masters. For me, thank you very much. For you, that does nothing, because you are now calling into question the elections we've had in the past that we showed you to clearly be rigged and stolen, and you denied them. Why are the Democrats not upset? Well, why aren't the Republicans upset? There is some work being done in some places, but not focused on the machines.
I honestly don't know. I think that the reactions that we've seen in the last few days over the new rules promulgated by Georgia's state election board requiring hand counting of the number of ballots in polling places on election day is really misdirected. I'm surprised that there's so much concern over that and so little concern over the illegal distribution of the software for the voting systems, because the latter really is a way to wreak havoc or at least cast uncertainty, whereas the former is really just a good accounting check to make sure that the voting machines have registered the correct number of voters. It's not about counting the votes. It's about making sure that the number of people who signed in is equal to the number of ballots that you found, give or take people who leave without voting, or something like that. It is a foundational thing for election integrity to have good physical inventories of the ballots and other election materials, rather than simply relying on the voting system to self-report how many ballots were counted. So I really view that as an ingredient in a proper canvas. Most other states that you have some kind of physical accounting of ballots like that. California does that routinely. So I don't see that as a red flag. I see it as a valuable step.
So the host believes that what was just voted for by the Georgia State Election Board is Republicans attempting to steal the election in Georgia. And Philip Stark just tells him to his face, no, actually, that's a smart and wise step toward election integrity. They should absolutely know how many votes were cast at a voting center or polling place. This is how far around the bend these people are. They believe that the software's been stolen and counting the ballots is a method for cheating because the TV told them that. Let's hear his response really quickly, because there's a point in this, and I hope that I can remember it without going through the whole thing. But there's a point where Philip Stark says, yeah, you're actually making an argument for why elections should be called into question in the past. And maybe it's right here as he continues.
Well, it's mystifying why the press have seized on that and aren't looking at what we're talking about, which is.
It's mystifying that the press have seized on that and they aren't talking about what we're talking about, which is the problems with the machines, which, of course, he believes is Republicans have stolen the software. This guy's amazing. This is like the greatest red pillar of all time by accident.
The Republican theft of the software in Georgia, meaning that all the machines in Georgia, they stole it through Coffee County, but they right across the 159 precincts or counties. It's the same software. So, but it's also, I believe that the Republicans also have gotten hold of the software in Arizona. And
now I have to pause for a second, because he is concerned both that the software has been, quote unquote, stolen in Georgia, and that the Republicans are going to use that stolen software to rig the election. And he's upset that they are going to count the number of ballots to make sure that the number matches the output from the computer. You got that? So apparently, gosh, man, these people have no idea what they're saying. No idea what they're saying. He doesn't want the count of the ballots, and he also believes that the machines are corrupted. If you want an election with election integrity, then you got to count the ballots. That seems like one of the most basic possible things. And he's like, no, we can't have that. The software has been corrupted. We just cannot do with them counting the ballots. Oh, man. In the chat, DL Field 1. Well, who had the software previously? This is so stupid, it has to be an op. Yep, I would agree with you. Who had the software previously? Well, the regime and their entities. Dominion is as much part of the regime as the media is, and as much part of the regime as the Uniparty, the DNC, and the RNC are. All of those are part of the same thing, and these guys pretend that the R and the D, the red and the blue, the right and the left, mean there's actually a difference, and that those two quote-unquote sides don't support the same overall agenda. There was another question in the chat from well, I cannot find that particular question. Oh, here we are. MM Rhodes says, is this narrative convergence? Certainly narratives are converging. Yeah. If you guys have been listening to the show for a long time, I've been talking since early 2021 about how it was inevitable, unavoidable, that the truth about our elections would come out and everyone would know it. And this is a necessary goal of both sides, which means that it has to happen. Like even Klaus Schwab doesn't want this election system ultimately. He doesn't want election systems generally. They are probably going to do something that is internet-based, related to your phone or something else, where they are able to fully manipulate that system. And conversely, there's probably going to be a very similar system presented by the other side that has more verifiability, let's say with Bitcoin or something. And Guatemala apparently is well down this road already. All of that. I'm a fan and a supporter of Bitcoin. You might even say that I'm a Bitcoin maximalist because I think that it is definitely going to be part of our future in one sense or many senses. I'm not entirely sure it will be primarily as a currency, although that will obviously be part of it. I think it is better as a digital asset. I believe in the verification and the inability to manipulate it as the most important parts of that. And if you read Jason Lowery's software, I think that there is an argument there that it will be part of our national security infrastructure. And then RPM 5954 says, is this accelerating the informational timeline? Well, that's not how the informational timeline works, to put it as bluntly as possible, just so we're clear on this. I know that Burning Bright occasionally uses that phrase in this context, and that's not right. And I love that he uses the phrase. I believe that he fully understands the concept. I believe that he's taking that and porting it into another concept to which I don't intend it to apply, except in this sense. Okay. So every person exists at a place on an informational timeline relative to real time in reality prime. Okay. We are all somewhere behind real time in reality prime to the extent that time is real. All right. We may one day find out that that's not the case. Okay. If we're in a simulation or something and all our consciousnesses are moving in a way that we think is natural and turns out not to be, or something, and I'm not going to go into this. If there's a case that time is not real, that would be an exception to what I'm saying. But we are all behind real time in reality prime. There are people well ahead of us. Donald Trump is well ahead of us on an informational timeline. Elon Musk is well ahead of us on an informational timeline. And the further ahead you are on that informational timeline, the more you know what the actual issues are and can correspond with those actual issues closer to real time. People who are still watching MSNBC are, well, if they've been Trump hating since 2015, they are at least 9 years behind real time on an informational timeline. Whereas people who are watching Tucker Carlson might be only 3 or 4 years behind real time on an informational timeline. Both of those are totally unacceptable. Okay. It is not okay to live your life that far behind on an informational timeline. That is only going to be to your detriment. All right. Hold on one second. I want to rewind just so I can make sure.
In Michigan, is that true?
That's my understanding for at least some of the voting systems that are used there, the Dominion voting system.
Okay, so we paused to talk about how this crazy person hosting this podcast, whose name is Ian Masters, believes simultaneously that the systems are totally corrupted, but also that that counting the ballots, as the Georgia State Election Board just voted to do, is totally untenable. You can't have that because the TV told him. Let's continue.
particular. So it's a slightly different version from what's used in Georgia, but the same basic device, the same manufacturer. That came out of I think what happened in Maricopa, if I'm recalling correctly, and what happened in Antrim. But I've come to think of it, I think wasn't in Colorado, Tina Peters also involved in something similar in allowing unauthorized access to the voting systems and their software.
Mm. So that's another state then, Colorado.
I believe so. Yeah, if my memory is correct.
So again, why aren't the Democrats tearing their hair out, and why can't they demand a fix with the software?
I'm not a mind reader, but the impression I get is that the Democrats are worried about admitting that the voting systems have any flaws that would sort of retroactively delegitimize Biden's win.
There it is.
And they're worried about admitting that the systems have any flaws because they're worried about the effect that would have on voter turnout.
There it is.
Personally, I think that honesty is the best policy here, and there really are significant security problems with these systems. We do know how to conduct elections in a way that is trustworthy.
Nope.
It involves hand-marked paper ballots for the vast majority of voters, with electronically marked paper ballots for voters who need accommodations for
blindness
because of their ability to their dexterity in handling paper or their visual acuity in being able to read a screen or sort of read a printed ballot. Then keeping track of those ballots rigorously, rigorous chain of custody and ballot accounting, including the kind of thing that was just passed by the Georgia State Election Board, requiring keeping track of the number of ballots that arrive in a polling place and the number that are then voted, spoiled, or unused. Tabulating those ballots, the votes on those ballots using whatever technology you like. Optical scan is very common. And then auditing the outcomes of all of those contests in a statistically rigorous way, for example, using risk limiting audits. There are issues
statistically significant way. Isn't that what he said? Let's just get the exact phrase.
Around ensuring that only eligible voters cast ballots, and there could be more work done to audit those eligibility determinations and audit the accuracy with which people were given the appropriate ballot based on their eligibility to vote in particular contests. But this is really kind of a solved problem. It just involves more shoe leather than most people want to put into it.
This is a solved problem. It just involves more shoe leather than people are willing to put into it. Well, no, Philip, you are protecting a corrupt system. And if you realized the system was corrupt, you would realize exactly why these systems are kept in place. But he said it very clearly. Why aren't the Democrats' hair on fire? Well, it's because they don't want to call into question the results from the past, like President Joe Biden. Except the problem is these voting machines are used everywhere. It's not just Biden. And I would have to think that Philip Stark, who talks about elections as part of his professional work, knows that it's not just about Joe Biden. This is about all the elections everywhere. And, whatever. I don't mean to complain too much because it is what it is. And we've kind of just been there, and it's probably a good growth and learning experience that we've had. So I don't mean to make this about myself, but we all have talked about this stuff for a really long time. And people will say things like, all right, well, I know it's a problem, but it can't be that much of a problem. What are you talking about? The system itself is incapable of producing legitimacy. That's it. From top to bottom, that is the only thing that matters. If you can't cross that bare minimum hurdle, then the rest of it doesn't matter at all. Okay? The system is not capable of producing legitimacy. The fact that it is wide open and vulnerable to manipulation and that there are no legitimate checks done on any element of it only makes it that much worse. And we are only talking about the actual vote casting and vote counting process. These people are insane. The whole thing goes down the drain if people realize what our elections really are, which is why they still protect them in these subtle ways and say, oh, yeah, it's still a close election. Oh, well, we're just going to have to respect the outcome of the election. It's not a perfect system, but it's what we have to work with right now. And what we need to do is we need to get some politicians in there who will change it. Craziness. This is absolutely crazy. RPM followed up in the chat and said, accelerating our personal informational timeline, not the informational timeline. Well, yes, then that I would agree is an accurately stated question. I would say also that you are, that the concern really ultimately is that everybody is dealing with themselves relative to real time in reality prime. All right. And that's it. So will this accelerate? Will this bring some people closer to real time in reality prime? Here's how that would happen. Okay. If they are convinced through listening to this that the election systems are completely flawed, then that is good. That's a very tiny step closer. Okay. Now you have understood that one of your misconceptions about this subject is wrong. So at that point, then you begin the unwinding process by saying, what other misconceptions might flow from this one? And pretty soon you would get to the misconception where you believe that our elections are free and fair, safe and secure, and that the reported results accurately reflect the will and intent of the voter. Okay? Maybe that's a few steps down the line during that unwinding process. But while you are unwinding, you are not anywhere closer to, well, maybe you might be. I mean, I guess you have a greater chance of someday approaching real time and reality prime, although I'm not sure you're walking toward it until you've actually unwound the whole thing. So at some point after that, after realizing that the elections are not free and fair, safe and secure, the reported results do not reflect the will and intent of the voter, then you will realize, oh, goodness, there's no reason to believe that Joe Biden received 81 million real lawful American votes. And so now you have a few new branches to explore, right? One of them is, well, he clearly didn't win that race. Who else clearly didn't win that race whose votes were counted the same way Joe Biden's were? And then you'll see, okay, there's no one I can know that's legitimate. And then you're like, okay, well, my government is illegitimate. How long has the government been illegitimate? Why are they lying to us about the government being illegitimate? And another branch breaks off with the media. Okay. And so you've got to really unwind all the way back to the bottom in terms of elections and come to the conclusion, yes, our elections are totally, absolutely, completely illegitimate. There is no hope in this election system because the election system is designed to fail on purpose. Okay. It is designed to steal elections on behalf of the uniparty. It is not designed to count your vote. All right. And when you get to that point, then you become closer on an informational timeline. Now, everybody leading governments around the world is already at that point, which means they are right now significantly ahead of you on an informational timeline. If you still believe we have real elections, Donald Trump does not believe we have real elections. Elon Musk does not believe we have real elections. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris don't believe we have real elections. Okay. This would be like, let's make this example totally unrelated to politics. I mean, everything's related in some way, but Spotify tells you who the most popular artists are every year. Spotify's play counts and thus their payouts to artists are a product of an algorithmic manipulation. Okay. The play counts are manipulated by algorithm. I have proven this to myself directly with my own direct knowledge with my podcast that I used to host on Anchor. I am now banned from the Spotify platform. It could be because I brought this to their attention. In addition to that, the artists know that there is a payola system to have that algorithm influenced on their behalf, and they do that. Anybody looking to break in is going to think like, man, my manager says if I invest 20 grand, it might really make this one track pop off. And then after that, who knows? That's how that works. Okay. And between those two things, you can immediately know that there is an element of any popular musician's popularity that is totally contrived and a mental manipulation of the people listening to that music, because those particular people are more concerned with going along with what's popular and conforming to that consensus than they are about finding what music they actually like, which is very sad. So in that situation, this is not the least bit controversial. But then you port that same parallel or a parallel situation in politics, and all of a sudden people are up in arms about it. Okay. The system is designed to manipulate outcomes. You cannot then expect it to give you a legitimate outcome until the system has been provably fixed, if possible. Our election system has not been provably fixed, and it may not be possible. So to then again assume, well, it's the best we've got and we've got to fight within this, good luck. Okay, so if you are not prepared to accept what is at the bottom, if you have unwound it all the way, we could have all just understood from our childhood that these elections are bullshit. And some people did, because some people's parents told them, yeah, kid, if the votes mattered, they wouldn't let you do it. Some people heard that from their parents growing up, and they've known it their entire lives, and they have focused on everything other than politics because of it. And maybe that's a little bit unfortunate. Sometimes when you know the truth and you settle into that truth and how it operates in a world full of untruth, you just assume that the world will always only be untruth and you give up. And that's blackpilling. That's unfortunate. But the way to get all the way back on the informational timeline is actually to unwind it all the way. And to unwind it all the way, you really have to deal with those foundational misunderstandings all the way at the bottom. And if you're doing this process, and this is how I've described it in the episode on informational time travel, if this is in your relationship life, you're going to have to go all the way back to some stuff that happened in your childhood, maybe with your parents and how they modeled relationships. Maybe you were sexualized at a young age and took a bunch of wrong lessons from that, and it's affected you forever after that. So there's a lot of personal work to do on this stuff. You don't just immediately snap back to real time on an informational timeline, unless it's maybe the result of trauma and you just realize immediately, oh yeah, this whole thing's messed. And that does happen. So I'm not saying it's impossible, but I certainly would not expect everyone to have a reaction like that right away. So I hope that answers your question. Man, I know it's been an hour. You guys can tell me if you're kind of over this subject. I think that like sometimes listening to the most addled communists is just such an enlightening experience. Let's hold on. I have some timestamps marked. Maybe we can. Gosh, it's just all so.
In Georgia,
high level, at a high level, the first thing to do is remind everyone that even if there were no issue of the trustworthiness of the equipment or the processes or procedures or the election officials, et cetera, results as of election night are preliminary results. There is a canvass that takes place in every state. It takes some number of days or weeks to make sure that every validly cast ballot has been included in the count and no invalidly cast ballots have, or that there have been no invalidly cast ballots. That time includes processing late arriving vote by mail ballots. It includes resolving the status of provisionally cast ballots to determine whether or not they should be included. And it includes just error checking, just going over things to make sure that the process was right, that you did.
So he's defending elections taking much longer. Now, again, we're going to give him the benefit of the doubt in this case and say, hey, maybe he's talking about this working in a perfect system and he's just relaying the technicalities of a perfectly functioning system. They need to check every one of those ballots and it does take time. Otherwise, he is defending the system once again. Mail-in balloting, mass mail-in balloting should not be a thing. Absentee ballots upon request for military is fine. I don't mean upon request for military. I mean upon request or for military. Those are both fine. Okay. But the idea that there's just a lot of mail-in ballots and we need to extend the election to make sure those are counted, the phrase to make sure that each and every ballot is counted. Yes, that is important. theoretically, unless you are using it the way people used it in 2020, where they meant anything that is a ballot must be counted in the election, because otherwise you are potentially disenfranchising someone. And the potential for disenfranchisement is far more valuable than any bit of election integrity could possibly be.
Scan a batch of ballots twice or omit a batch of ballots from the scan. It takes a long time to do that. And different states have different canvass durations. California, I think, is 28 days. Most states are shorter than that, but we also have an unusually long period in which we allow voters to, quote unquote, cure defects in, say, signatures on absentee ballots. If the local election official says this doesn't look like your signature, they're supposed to contact you and give you an opportunity to redress that if it really is your signature. So the results on election night don't include a large number of validly cast ballots, and they really aren't final. It really is a projection as of election night, and people need to be patient and allow the local election officials to do their jobs and make sure that they have, counted every last validly cast ballot.
So the questioner is very concerned about the elections. What if it shows Kamala is winning in every state but these states? And he goes into exit polls next, and then he's going to go into what the bookies are saying. Okay, fine. So let's say the polls are fake, even though Kamala's going to win in a landslide. What about the bookies? There are some bookies out there, and they've got a lot of money riding on the line. They must do some incredible research. Well, what research do they do? Do they analyze polls? Do they let people bet? Bookies' jobs is to keep the betting 50% on either side and then profit from the VIG. Okay? That's why they set the odds, so that they can just give all the winners the money of the losers and keep all of those additional fees that are charged. So the bookies are not more accurate. I don't know who decided this a few years ago. Oh, the bookies know what's up. Well, no, there's no reason to believe that the bookies know what's up. Maybe they do, or maybe the people who are influencing the public's perception and paying $6 million to get a crowd to a Kamala Harris rally are also placing large bets in betting markets on Kamala Harris to make it look like the public wants Kamala Harris to win. We're talking about people with unlimited access to regime fiat currency, and this being the greatest existential crisis they may have ever faced. They're going to spend the fake money. Gosh, man, it is amazing to me that that people will just be like, oh, well, this authoritative source is definitely the one to trust. I can understand why they're saying this method is trustworthy. So I guess we better believe this. This is the new thing. Everybody knows polls are fake, but do you know about betting markets? Dummy.
Well, there is, of course, an alternative to the polls, and that is the bookies. And with a lot of money on the line, Philip, I'm assuming that the bookies have probably do pretty serious research. I'm hearing from the bookies that they think Harris could win. Some are saying in a landslide. So again, what would happen if there was a landslide for Harris, but in these key states of Georgia, Arizona, Michigan, and Colorado, for some mysterious reason, Trump wins? Is there any way to reconcile? Do exit polls come into the picture? How do we deal with this contingency?
Exit polls are not highly accurate, and whether they would be accurate enough to reliably determine, margins that are a fraction of a percent. I mean, that seems unlikely. I mean, the problems with exit polls is a lot of people won't talk to you. What you get may not be a representative sample, may not be anything like a random sample of voters. Some people won't tell you the truth. The particular precincts where you do the exit polls may not be representative of a state as a whole. I mean, it's a complicated thing, and we're really talking about something that needs to be measured with a micrometer, not a yardstick. And exit polls are more like a yardstick. So that's one issue. Landslide, I mean, I haven't really paid much attention to betting on election outcomes. I would not be surprised at all if the popular vote were a landslide in favor of Harris. But what matters is the Electoral College vote, and at the moment that it's not obvious that would be a landslide. It kind of feels pretty close. So I'm not sure what money's being bet on, but.
All right. So I'm going to skip up more toward the end, but there you go. Exit polls. Nope. Those don't work either. So I don't know what Philip Stark's intentions are, and I'm not going to try to ascribe intentions to him. I can analyze his words and what he's saying. I think that he is holding back from saying things that he certainly must know. It is my inclination to believe that is because of his politics and his position as a stats professor at Berkeley. It is informed with me watching Philip Stark operate in the aftermath of the 2020 election. But I want to be clear that I could be wrong, and maybe he is a good man handling this conversation with kid gloves and being direct about some of these very important facts. I look at something like this that is just so overt, and I think this is a very, very valuable weapon, okay? If there are people who don't understand our elections are bullshit, get this into their ears somehow, because there is no way to still think that our elections are legitimate after this. And I am totally content. This is me speaking. I don't know what the plan is, but from my perspective, I am fine with every child-brained standard issue villager in the world understanding that our elections are bullshit and then taking the next step after that, because we have gotten them, because that is the key understanding for Americans to actually unify around this issue and figure out if elections are the way to move forward, what the system is that would allow election legitimacy so that we can actually participate in a society and have a government that is accountable to the people and governs with the consent of the people. They have to get to that point. There is nothing else. And if we don't need to be shown, if we don't need to get the hose again in order to have people like him reach that conclusion, that would be amazing. This is what I've been talking about for months and months. Okay. The reason to be truthful about our elections is because one way or another, that point must be reached. It has to be reached. In any possible scenario, that point must be reached. That is one of the only ways to get the problem fixed. Without that happening, there is no fix. So if it can happen this way from people listening to the podcasts in the run-up to an election, rather than figuring it out from a stolen election and causing chaos and violence, that is a 100% win. The regime's biggest goal is civil war. This is the sort of thing that prevents it. That is why I take the approach to elections I do. And if people think, oh, you're telling people not to vote. No, do whatever you want. I'm not telling people to do anything. I'm just making sure that people know, no matter what you vote for and no matter who the TV announces as the winners, that election was illegitimate and not sufficient to create a legitimate government. Okay? What you do with that information is totally up to you. What you should do, if you care about these things, is get involved, spread truth at minimum. Okay? Get the research done. Be ready to use your ideas to influence a system. Get involved in your local politics if you have the personality, the time, the lifestyle that allows for that. If you are committed to public service, go do that. Don't do it to get power. Don't do it because there's going to be a power vacuum. But if you want to go spend your time doing public service, do it in that scenario. All right? Be informed about what it is you are doing, because you are not going out and helping to win a real election. And again, people can do that with that information what they like. But this point must be reached for the fix to be possible, and we prevent it every time we deny the reality of the situation as it exists. I want to play one more clip here. I'm just going to do one more because I do want to move on and talk about other things. It's around 17 minutes.
So it's more solid evidence than polling evidence is.
Okay,
just
hold on.
on some level, circumstantial evidence, and the ballots, the procedures, the audit of the elections, those things, I think.
This is about polling. Again, he's trying to say, well, what if the polls say this and it's this? Is that proof of cheating? What if the polls say that Kamala is going to win in a landslide and then she loses in just these 3 states? Is that how we're going to get Trump cheating on these machines? And man, this was like a normie argument for an election denier in 2021. This guy hasn't even reached a normie election denier in 2021 level. Although, I mean, listen, man, everybody always says, oh, well, you should be encouraging these people. Why? Like, okay, I guess maybe if he comes out and says, I was really wrong about that stuff before, fine. But he's not coming out and saying that. He's freaked out that Donald Trump and MAGA are going to steal the election because he believes that we're extremists and going to destroy democracy. So that doesn't get encouragement from me. Oh, come on, little buddy stranger. Come on, 60-year-old little buddy stranger. I'm going to encourage you along. Let's keep going.
More solid evidence than polling evidence is.
But just in closing, it's bad enough having the Electoral College determine who the president is, because this is the only democracy in the world where the popular vote doesn't count, which is bizarre. And as you mentioned earlier, and there's a great likelihood that Harris could have a substantial victory in the popular vote, which then raises the question of how did she lose? But on top of that, you've got this uncertainty about the results in these states simply because the software for the voting machines has been compromised. So to my mind, this is an outrage.
That is a child-brained standard issue villager saying that the election system is an outrage. This situation is an outrage, and wondering why Democrats' hair isn't on fire. What is the answer to that question? Why can't this guy add 2 + 2? Because he is told that the answer to that question is everything other than 4. Okay? That's what it is. That is what it means to be at a total inversion within the false reality. 2 + 2 is everything but 4. The one answer it's not is 4. Why isn't the hair of Democrats on fire about this election system? This is an outrage. Why can't they tell? Why can't the media tell? Hey, Ian Masters, it's because they're lying to you, commie. Let's listen to just a second of Philip Stark's response, and then we'll move on.
Well, I think it's definitely a setup for uncertainty and doubt and outrage, but regardless of who is named the winner. I'm concerned about violence and bloodshed, regardless of who is named the winner. And I think that, the way out, which obviously there's nothing we can do in time for the 2024 presidential election, but the way out is to run elections in a better way. This idea of evidence-based elections, that it's not enough to say so-and-so won. Election officials should provide convincing evidence that that person really did win. And again, the ingredients in that are good checks at voter eligibility, hand-marked paper ballots for the majority of voters with an accessible option for those who can't independently hand-mark a paper ballot, rigorous ballot accounting, physical security, chain of custody checks, and so forth, and then risk-limiting audits of the results of all contests on the ballot. And that can provide, affirmative evidence, evidence that the reported winners really did win. And unless we get there, some degree of skepticism is justified. That said, there's a difference between being somewhat skeptical and believing that the election was stolen or that people cheated, that there was fraud on wide scale. And I've never seen evidence of that, but I have seen errors, errors of thousands of votes, thousands of ballots, including in 2020 in Georgia.
So that actually, that right there at the end should ruin Ian Masters' view about Donald Trump's phone call to Georgia asking them to find him 11,780 votes, Philip Stark just said himself he has seen evidence of thousands of ballots worth of error in Georgia. So immediately that's gone. He says that the elections aren't actually trustworthy. That is what he just said. And he gave a list of things that will fix them and of course, included risk limiting audits. That is not a part of it. It doesn't make any sense. The election system must be in a way that it can be reviewed by everyone by counting, not risk limiting audits, not figuring out what some little part of the system and how that worked. If it was every contest, I guess if it was every contest in every precinct, I don't know. I would have this conversation with some of my election integrity people and see what they think about that. But yeah, every contest, I don't know that that's enough, because you could, if you were talking about Georgia and you did a risk limiting audit in 10 counties that were all uniparty controlled counties and maybe not that big or whatever, and then ignored another 150 counties or maybe 160 counties. Can't remember what Georgia is. If you ignored the rest of that, then you haven't really done a risk limiting audit on those races, because it can be just individual to a given precinct. They're going to steal votes in a given precinct. The system is definitely that complex, and they've got it that well worked out. So it's a little weird that he's still on the risk limiting audit thing. I don't think that is sufficient, but he just agreed that this is an outrage and that people don't have reason to trust their elections. And then he couches it that he doesn't have evidence that they've been rigged and have evidence that they've been stolen. But of course, yes, he does. The idea that Joe Biden received 81 million real lawful American votes, without that assumption, which Philip Stark clearly makes, there would be even less cause to believe that Kamala Harris is anywhere close to Donald Trump. You have to believe the election results from 2020 to think that there's any possibility of a close race right now, because the country hates Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and virtually everyone knows that. There are little pockets that Ian Masters is in, for instance, where people don't know that. And maybe at UC Berkeley, they don't know that. Everywhere else, people know it because their friends and family members have changed their positions. It's impossible for people to not know these things. No one who was a Republican, except for those establishment neocon types, has gone from being a Republican to being a Democrat, being a Republican to becoming someone who would vote for Kamala Harris. That is not a common experience for anybody. Everyone knows what the common experience is: watching their peers, their friends, their loved ones, their coworkers go from supporting the regime or the Democrat Party to becoming MAGA and Trump supporters. And that includes all the RFK Jr. supporters. All of this is so crazy. It is so crazy. But hey, man, this, again, my friends, is a significant weapon in my mind. And I'll try to remember to put this link in the Substack post for when I release the audio version of this. But there it is right there. Show that to anyone. A liberal can get through listening to that. There's not a kind word spoken about Trump. It's only fear and Trump derangement. So they're not going to be offended by any of that. They might be offended that there are so many stupid people on their side, but I doubt it. This would be the sort of thing they could listen to and then bring up to you, and you'd be like, oh, wait, really? You think it's normal that this guy knows the machines are corrupted in Georgia, but also doesn't want a hand count of the ballots? What's normal about that? Why wouldn't you want a hand count of the ballots? These are the issues where we have to go on offense, not in a way that we celebrate, oh, the elections now have election integrity. I don't even know if that's going to happen. And by the way, again, I don't think it makes any sense to analyze an election as though it's definitely going to happen when we don't know it's definitely going to happen. And when the people controlling that aspect know whether or not an election is going to happen and we don't, then we are having two different conversations, right? They can, at that point, just allow stories to progress in different ways because that story has no impact on the situation whatsoever if they already know the election is going to be canceled? Does that make sense? I think you guys will totally get that. If the election is not going to happen, then the details about whether or not there would be a hand count in Georgia this year based on the state election board, that conversation is irrelevant because the people at a high level already know whether or not the election will be canceled. The election being canceled will just be a narrative device, just as the election happening in the first place is a narrative device. Okay? There's nothing else to this. You cannot cancel a fake election in a real way, right? Because a real election is not scheduled. It was always going to be a fake election. So all of the run up to the fake election has been a charade, a farce, a stage show. People have been going through the motions as though something was going to happen, but they were just coaxed into doing that by someone with more power and more information than they have. Okay? That doesn't, at the end of the day, mean that the election was real up until the time it was canceled. It means it was fake the whole time, and a bunch of people went along with it anyway. Did we do that? We tracked it. Did we fret about it being real? Did we fret about what would happen as the result of a fake election? I haven't done much fretting. I've been telling you this whole thing was fake for well over 2 years when the fake primaries started. Or sorry, not well over 2 years, just under 2 years when the fake primaries started. When Trump whispered his first DeSanctimonious and all of the DeSantis simps immediately sprung into action, it was quite clear that that there was going to be a Ron run for president. It didn't start for another 7 months, but I said there were fake primaries the whole time. Understand that they are fake. This is a farce. It is playing out before our eyes. We are here watching it. The results of all these things are obviously baked into the cake, which is, again, just another one of those things, man. It's one of those things you either accept or you don't accept, okay? Elections do not get decided by voters. Elections get decided by people far more powerful than voters. They're talking about running the most powerful country in the free world, all right? If that can be seized from the control of the global regime that has controlled all of these other countries around the world, and they say that explicitly, this is our agenda: one world, liberal, international, rules-based order. If the country can be seized from those people, it would not be through an election that they're just like, yeah, hey, how about that, man? We thought we were really popular, and it turns out that we're not. Darn it. All right, well, good game, everybody. We're going to take off. We're going back to Israel. I mean, Ukraine. I mean, Khazaria. I mean, Babylon. Fuck. All right. Catgirl88 says, what if all the election machines all blew up like the pagers? Only no people would be hurt. Well, that would potentially upset Mike Lindell, who wants to burn them all down and turn them into prison bars. I am 100% on board with Mike Lindell doing that. So I guess I would also be upset. But if they all just disappeared immediately, that would be lovely. RPM says, at what point will the results of 2020 not matter anymore? Well, I don't think that point will ever arrive. The results matter. And we're going to get some resolution. There might not be legitimate results to retrieve, although I'm not convinced of that. But regardless, the resolution, if the resolution is that the country, by and large, a critical mass consensus is reached, that the 2020 election cannot be confirmed in any way and was clearly a product of fraud, that would be, I think, far enough. I don't think we need the actual real results, right? If it was proven beyond a shadow of a doubt, like to the point where no one could doubt it, that Joe Biden had created 40 million votes, 30 million, let's say 30 million, because that's the number I usually use. 30 million votes. That's enough, right? something like that could potentially be proven. Now, people accepting that, that's a different thing. But I don't see why there's any reason to believe it's not that number, because there's no justification whatsoever, none presented except for mail-in ballots, that would suggest an increase of 20% in turnout from 2016 over 2020. Just does not make sense in the middle of a very deadly pandemic. Makes no sense at all. And all the other examples of fraud and manipulation and malfeasance only support that conclusion. So, yeah, I mean, when the country understands that finally, which, they'll have to. And yeah, you got to understand that the way people are actually convinced over time of things is you telling the truth the entire time, them seeing you telling the truth the entire time, realizing that you are right about things they are wrong about over and over and over again, and being absolutely unyielding the entire time. I will not accept the framing of any communist who wants to get in a conversation with me. I don't accept the framing of truthers who want to get in the conversation with me, because it is very important to restate the truth every time and talk only about those things, rather than assuming something false is true and then pretending it's true for the purpose of a conversation, unless you are consistently pointing out, hey, I'm going to take your position on this just to see where it goes, but that position is not correct. It is actually this. You got to just make a practice of only saying the truth all the time, to the extent you know it, right? I'm not claiming that someone has possession of the truth, certainly not me, but to the extent that I know the truth, I am trying to speak the truth to the absolute best of my ability. And that ends up putting me in a lot of risky situations occasionally. And I'm sure that it will in about a month and a half. So all good. Okay, so let's talk about RICO Grande a little bit. We're going to switch subjects. Actually, let me take a drink of water and fill my water glass. Let's talk about, I'm going to present to you once again with the wonderful drainage. And then we will, actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to give you this one.
Points in Nevada. That's supposed to be a little bit Democrat territory, but we're leading in Nevada, and a waitress came over, beautiful waitress, and I never like talking about physics because she's beautiful inside, because you never talk about a person's look, ever. You never mention it. The other day, I got very angry. Some man called Chris Christie fat, and I said, sir, and then he said he was a pig. I said, sir, Chris Christie is not a fat pig. Please remember that. He is not a fat pig. Please take it back. And the guy's looking at me like, really? No, we have to defend people. You can't call people fat. So I said about 9 times, he is not a fat pig.
I love it. It's it gets to be much more entertaining once you realize once you realize some of what I was just talking about, if you don't have to have the anxiety reaction when you think about quote unquote elections, then all of this stuff becomes much more entertaining. You don't need to compromise with the dumbest people on earth who have just tried to destroy everybody's lives over the last 4 years. Okay. You don't need to compromise with them. And I'm not saying to create enemies and then do terrible things to them. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying there's no compromise that needs to be made. You don't need to be polite for these people in situations that don't affect them at all. It's okay if they're offended. It's okay if they think that you're a bad guy and they say you're a bad guy and the news says you're a bad guy. It doesn't matter at all. It doesn't matter at all. And as soon as you realize that it doesn't matter at all, then you can actually have some fun with it like Trump does, rather than freaking out all the time. When does Trump ever freak out? Never. So why do people online freak out all the time? You have to listen to Trump and go vote. Hey, how about you listen to Trump and chill the fuck out? I'm going to clip that. So Newsweek yesterday, 2 days ago, sorry. Donald Trump looks to revive racketeering lawsuit against Hillary Clinton. What? That's what Kyle's mom in South Park does. What? I wonder if I can find her. what is her name? Something Broflowski. It's not Julia, is it? Man, I haven't watched South Park in a while. I love that show. I actually figured out a mystery. Oh, wow. It's like it comes up on auto finish. I figured out a mystery that I've been dealing with. Oh, her name's Sheila. That I've been trying to sort out for a really long time. It's a line from a movie that's been in my head for a while. And I couldn't figure it out. It was this very creepy and kind of foreboding repetition of the line, "Do you see?" And I couldn't figure it out. And so I asked Perplexity AI this morning, and they didn't give me the right answer, but over, like off to the side, they posted a picture of Cartman from South Park restrained in a chair with this weird dude in a robe and underwear with a green trucker hat on. And I was like, whoa, that was it. And so I figured out what episode that was. I had to take myself down a totally silly rabbit hole this morning, but I figured out what episode that was and then was like, okay, what time was this? This was parodying a movie. What movie was it? And I was like, I'm pretty sure it's Red Dragon from the Hannibal Lecter series. And it's a scene between Ralph Fiennes and Philip Seymour Hoffman. And I'm not going to show it on here because the visuals during that scene are grotesque and it is unsettling. But I have finally solved that mystery. And man, I can't tell you. I've been thinking about that for 2 years. Just like, I'll see this someday again. Oh, man. Amazing what the machine can do when you're using it for its intended purpose. Oh, man. All right. Here's the South Park, by the way.
Dude, this is worse than Child Tracker.
It's okay, boys. Just act as if we weren't here.
Right. Do what you normally would do.
You're such a fat ass, Cartman. At least I'm not a stupid Jew.
What?
Oh, man. It got cut off. That's one of them. She used to do it a lot. Whatever. Okay, so Donald Trump looks to revive racketeering lawsuit against Hillary Clinton. Donald Trump is taking a racketeering case against Hillary Clinton to a federal appeals court. On Friday, a federal judge gave Trump until September 27th to file a brief of up to 10,000 words on why the case would be heard. Trump took a civil racketeering, influenced and corrupt organizations, well, that's RICO Act, against Clinton for allegedly trying to rig the 2016 election against him. So civil RICO against Hillary Clinton and all of her co-conspirators. He is seeking over $70 million in compensation, from Clinton and over 24 other defendants. He claims that he had to spend over $24 million defending himself from false accusations of Russian collusion in the 2016 election. The lawsuit filed in March 2022 also names the DNC, Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz, former FBI Director James Comey, among the defendants. Newsweek sought email comment from Clinton, Wasserman Schultz, Comey, and the Trump campaign on Monday. Apparently, they got none of that. Florida Circuit Appeals Court Judge Kevin Newsom wrote on Friday that he would extend the maximum word length on Trump's court filing to 10,000 words, up from the usual 6,500 words permitted by the court. Appellant's unopposed motion, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so they're allowed to write an extra long response, which is hilarious that this is an article about that. But what is this article really? That story is going to catch somebody's eye. Silly reason to publish an article in the first place, but they're bringing it back to the public consciousness because it is go time on this stuff. In March 2022, in his lawsuit, Trump alleged Clinton was involved in a nefarious scheme to discredit, delegitimize, and defame Trump's presidential campaign. In a strongly worded judgment in September 2022, Florida federal judge Donald M. Middlebrooks completely rejected Trump's claim. He accused Trump of seeking to flaunt a 200-page political manifesto outlining his grievances against those that have opposed him. And this court is not the appropriate forum. Middlebrooks also attacked, quote, the audacity of plaintiffs' legal theories and the manner in which they clearly contravene binding case law. Ha ha. I guess we'll see, right? That's why you appeal. And maybe Middlebrooks did his job just fine, and this is meant to be appealed and then appealed and appealed all the way up to the Supreme Court, and then that's just fine. Such pleadings waste judicial resources and are an unacceptable form of establishing a claim for relief, he added. So Trump is appealing, okay? Let's go over to the special legal place Justia, where all the dockets and filings are. So the last docket was retrieved October 26th, 2023. Look at all these various filings over this course of time. So it's been going on well past when it was here's the appeal. October 11th, 2022. So Middlebrooks he made his decision. He dismissed this case. And we were told that the case was dismissed. Everybody's like, ah, ha, ha, Trump's stupid. Why did he file this? What a crazy case to file. Okay, commies. Appellees. Hillary Clinton, Igor Danchenko, DNC, Charles Dolan, Mark Elias, Fusion GPS, HFACC Incorporated. I'm not exactly sure who that is. Rodney Jaffe, Robbie Mook, Neustar, Nellie Orr, Orbis Business Intelligence, Perkins Coie, Jake Sullivan, Michael Sussman, and United States of America. Sorry. Man, I am so bad at reading on live streams. Those are a lot of people. Those are a lot of names who came up in the Durham investigation. He prosecuted Michael Sussman. Charles Dolan has his own thing separately. I believe they prosecuted Rodney Jaffe, Robbie Mook. What was Robbie Mook's major admission? It slips my mind right now. Robbie Mook, I think it was just that the Hillary Clinton campaign was responsible for the creation of the Steele dossier. But yeah, all of these people were involved in that thing, and everybody was upset when the Durham investigation didn't produce more than just those 3 indictments. Oh yeah, and of course Danchenko, and that Sussman was the only one who was convicted with a slap on the wrist. I said at the time, these are going to go into RICO Grande. I'm not really worried. These are setting out the evidence trail for everything else, and I think that you can look at the Joe Biden special counsel by Robert Hur in potentially the same way. Donald Trump keeps bringing that up because Joe Biden should have been prosecuted for his mishandling of documents, but wasn't because he's not fit to be prosecuted for whatever reason. And that reason is probably because he and Hunter are state's evidence at this point or something, or at least Hunter is. Whatever. Leave that aside. All of this information is flowing into this civil RICO. Okay. And so let's go. Let's do this. Let's switch to, here's what we're going to do. We're going to go to Perplexity really quick. Oh, darn. That was the wrong one. Summarize the purpose of civil RICO. The purpose of civil RICO, the Racketeered, Influenced, and Corrupt Organizations Act, can be summarized as follows. Combat organized crime. Okay. Target a pattern of activity. Rather than punishing isolated criminal acts, RICO aims to reach members of criminal enterprises who engage in a pattern of racketeering activity. Empower private plaintiffs. Civil RICO allows private individuals or entities who have been injured in their business or property to bring lawsuits against those engaged in racketeering activities. So normally, when a crime is committed, the state's attorney or the district attorney and attorney general would be prosecuting those cases. Trump is bringing this as a private individual. So this is a civil RICO. Provide enhanced remedies, yes, and okay, not limited to mobsters. To establish a RICO violation, plaintiffs must provide a pattern of racketeering activity, a culpable person, and an enterprise, and an effect on interstate commerce. Civil RICO claims must typically be brought within 4 years of the claim's accrual, which tells you there that there's going to be more involved to bring that case in March 2022 if they're talking only about activity from 2016. But they're not, because the criminal enterprise persisted in its criminal activity. The burden of civil RICO cases have a lower burden of proof, preponderance of evidence compared to criminal RICO cases. So this is not suggesting that Hillary Clinton herself is responsible for stealing the election and for defaming Trump and all this other stuff. It's saying all of these people involved were involved in a criminal enterprise that had cumulatively the same intent. Okay. So we'll move on from there. Let's see what they say about. Let's see what they say about what Perplexity has to say about the current status of Trump's proceedings here. So the first line, Donald Trump's civil RICO lawsuit against Hillary Clinton and others has been dismissed and is currently in the appeals process. So it's one of those things where it's like, just say it's in the appeals process. It has been dismissed. Okay, so it's not happening, but it's in the appeals process. I'm not saying it's not true. I'm saying it's a strange framing. The lawsuit filed in March 2022 was dismissed with prejudice by District Judge Donald Middlebrooks in September 2022. He applied sanctioned Trump and Alina Habba, ordering them to pay nearly $1 million in penalties. The judge cited a pattern of misuse of the courts as the reason for the sanctions. And now they have the update here. The defendants argue that the lawsuit is groundless and should be permanently dismissed. And Christopher Steele's company, Orbis, claims Trump is trying to weaponize the legal process rather than seek legitimate legal redress. Okay, so the appeal is still ongoing with no final decision reached. This case is still entirely active, and everyone has pretended for years that it's not. And the same holds true for Trump's lawsuits against big tech. And I think I talked about that on the podcast, or maybe just posted about it a couple of weeks ago. But those are still active as well. I think one of them against Twitter or something was dismissed. I come to this point on the podcast all the time where I say something, I'm like, I don't know if I was entirely accurate about that. So I need to stop and make sure that I say the exact right thing. Status of Trump's lawsuits against big tech. The cases are still in their early stages and have not reached trial. 3 different federal cases or federal judges are presiding over the cases. Wow. I love this. So experts say they face significant legal challenges. This is very interesting because the last time I went and looked for this, it talked only about how one of them had been dismissed. And I believe that it was the Twitter case. But so all of those cases, those class action lawsuits that he announced, let me see if I can still find that video. I don't know if you all remember this, but I actually wrote an affidavit and had it notarized and sent that affidavit in to, that was a different election fraud related class action. But Trump had a portal where normal American citizens could fill out affidavits and their testimony about their experience with stolen elections. And he brought some of those people to an event where he announced the big tech lawsuits. Yeah, here it is. Let's listen to this real quick. Why not?
I just want to say that I stand before you this morning to announce a very important and very beautiful, I think, development for our freedom and our freedom of speech. And that goes to all Americans. Today, in conjunction with the America First Policy Institute, I'm filing as the lead class representative a major class action lawsuit against the big tech giants, including Facebook, Google, and Twitter, as well as their CEOs, Mark Zuckerberg, Sundar Pichai, and Jack Dorsey. Three real nice guys. We're asking the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of Florida to order an immediate halt to social media companies' illegal, shameful censorship of the American people, and that's exactly what they are doing. We're demanding an end to the shadow banning, a stop to the silencing, and a stop to the blacklisting, banishing, and canceling that you know so well. Our case will prove this censorship is unlawful, it's unconstitutional, and it's completely un-American. We all know that. We all know that very, very well. Our filing also seeks injunctive relief to allow prompt restitution and really restoration, and you can name about 20 other things, and it has to be prompt because it's destroying our country. Of my accounts, in addition, we are asking the court to impose punitive damages on these social media giants. We're going to hold big tech very accountable. This is the first of numerous other lawsuits, I assume, that would follow, but this is the lead, and I think it's going to be a very, very important game changer for our country. It will be a pivotal battle in the defense of the First Amendment, and in the end, I am confident that we will achieve a historic victory for American freedom and at the same time, freedom of speech. So I want to thank all.
So, yeah, that's still going. It's just still totally going. And that's the president saying that he's the lead representative of that class. That class action lawsuit is still happening. Now, those like class action lawsuits against big tech are why I finally left all of legacy social media. I was banned on Twitter, obviously, for 2 years. I was banned on Instagram and unbanned, I don't know, days or maybe a week or so later, and then took myself off the platform on December 19th of 2020, or maybe it was the 18th. It was either the 19th or 20th. I think it was the 20th that they said our new terms of service go into effect. And if you continue to use the application after these new terms of service go into effect, you waive your right to join the class action lawsuit. Couldn't have been any clearer. And as soon as I saw that notice, I said, oh, cool. Well, there's going to be a class action lawsuit against Instagram and Facebook. I would like to be a part of that. I actually don't like these apps. I think that they are demoralization machines. And, you know, these people who I've known for this much time, if we actually have real relationships, they will survive me not being on Instagram. And yeah, so I look forward to the conclusion of those class action lawsuits, of course. Let's take just a little journey into this civil RICO, aka RICO Grande. And I think that that is the best way for us to refer to this. It's a nice and happy affair, RICO Grande is. So there are also, you will see here, Hillary, the DNC Services Corporation, Perkins Coie, Michael Sussman, Mark Elias, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, Charles Dolan, Jake Sullivan, John Podesta, Robbie Mook, Philip Rhines, Fusion GPS, Glenn Simpson, Peter Fritsch, Nellie Orr, Bruce Orr, Orbis Business Intelligence, Christopher Steele, Igor Danchenko, Neustar, Rodney Jaffe, James Comey, Peter Strzok, Lisa Page, Kevin Kleinsmith, Andrew McCabe, John Doe's 1 through 10, ABC Corporations 1 through 10. And I'm not sure if there is an attorney in the chat, please let me know whether 1 through 10 is just a standard way of saying it, or if that actually indicates a definite 10 in each instance. I am under the impression that that means some number of currently unnamed individuals and entities in this case. So here's the introduction, and maybe that's all we'll get to. I wanted to get into some of the statement of fact stuff. We'll do a little bit of it, but I really do want to get to people's questions, and I don't want to make this a 3.5-hour episode. In the run-up to the 2016 presidential election, Hillary Clinton and her cohorts orchestrated an unthinkable plot, one that shocks the conscience and is an affront to this nation's democracy. Acting in concert, the defendants maliciously conspired to weave a false narrative that their Republican opponent, Donald J. Trump, was colluding with a hostile foreign sovereignty. The actions taken in furtherance of their scheme, falsifying evidence, deceiving law enforcement, and exploiting access to highly sensitive data sources, are so outrageous, subversive, and incendiary that even the events of Watergate pale in comparison. And Trump has said many times that the events of Watergate pale in comparison. This is what he's talking about. And he's exactly right. And those examples have been proven throughout the special counsel investigations and other cases. It's amazing that all of this has been there for so long, and people think that everything hinges on the results of a fake election. This is an information problem, a knowledge gap, and it is leading people to make bad decisions in their lives and have bad experiences because of that lack of knowledge. Okay? I applied this to other things, the same concept the other day. If people are freaking out about elections and think that that's where the solution comes, I don't know what to tell you. The TV is going to tell people what the TV tells people. The elections are already fake and illegitimate. Under the guise of opposition research, data analytics, and other political stratagems, the defendants nefariously sought to sway the public's trust. They worked together with a single self-serving purpose: to vilify Donald J. Trump. Indeed, their far-reaching conspiracy was designed to cripple Trump's bid for presidency by fabricating a scandal that would be used to trigger an unfounded federal investigation and ignite media frenzy. How can any of this be denied? Okay? Even people who would deny the underlying claims know that that happened. There was a massive scandal that triggered a federal investigation and a media frenzy. Was the scandal justified? Did something happen? It has already been proven that things did not happen, that Donald Trump didn't actually do the things he was accused of. So then the question only becomes, are they right that these people who definitely conspired to set that thing up, were they doing so with criminal intent and to cause that? And the answer can only be yes. The facts are all there. Again, all of the people who would argue against this declared victory after John Durham's investigation was concluded with only those 3 prosecutions. That's what they did publicly, to sell that narrative to people. But John Durham's investigations and these other special counsel investigations have all the evidence that proves this case. Man, I mean, again, this is one of those times where I think, oh yeah, I'm probably speaking to the choir again, but, or preaching to the choir, sorry. I really, really hope that for other people who haven't been following this podcast for a long time, or who don't understand that this stuff is happening, will begin to understand the magnitude of these things. Okay. You can even put devolution aside and understand that this is still happening. Oh, man. There really are not the reasons to be freaking out that people think. And knowing that the regime's number one goal to retake control of the country is civil war, the strategy has to be not freaking out under any circumstances. Okay? Take care of yourself, take care of your family, take care of your neighbors or your extended family or whoever you're able to take care of once you are good. And that means physically, mentally, emotionally, whatever it is. But stop freaking out. Don't freak out. Okay? There's no reason to freak out. We're going to have to be patient. There might be some bumps ahead, some turbulence. Okay? But there's no freaking out. Let us continue. The scheme was conceived, coordinated, and carried out by top-level officials at the Clinton campaign and the DNC, including the candidate herself, who attempted to shield her involvement behind a wall of third parties. To start, the Clinton campaign and the DNC enlisted the assistance of their shared counsel, Perkins Coie, a law firm with deep Democrat ties, in the hopes of obscuring their actions under the veil of attorney-client privilege. Perkins Coie was tasked with spearheading the scheme to find or fabricate proof of a sinister link between Donald J. Trump and Russia. To do so, Perkins Coie launched parallel operations. On one front, Perkins Coie partner Mark Elias, the Democrat lawfare attorney, led an effort to produce spurious opposition research claiming to reveal illicit ties between the Trump campaign and Russian operatives. On a separate front, Perkins Coie partner Michael Sussman headed a campaign to develop misleading evidence of a bogus back-channel connection between email servers at Trump Tower and a Russian-owned bank. That is the Alpha Bank hoax, okay? Mark Elias is constantly freaking out, constantly, on MSNBC and elsewhere. He is no longer at Perkins Coie. He just does his democracy docket thing and goes around defending, through lawfare, stolen Democrat elections and the process, the regime's process in general. All right. Mark Elias's partner at his law firm was already indicted and found guilty and given a slap on the wrist, Michael Sussman. Okay. Did those people flip? Man, I guess we'll find out. The sting is ongoing. It seems to be, at least. So people like Mark Elias, who are out there ranting and raving on television, I mean, they know this stuff's going on in the background. Is Mark Elias confused about the status of these issues? Does Mark Elias believe that he's not in trouble and that Donald Trump is in trouble and that he's going to get to defend the election? Well, the TV is going to decide that, because the truth is he didn't really defend the last election, certainly not in any completed sense, because it's all still going. But people don't believe it's still going, and they don't believe it's possible that it's still going because they believe that Joe Biden has been a real president for the last 4 years. When each and every one of those things is dependent on another thing, and none of them can be supported without the rest of them, and you know that virtually all of them are true, it's probably that all of them are true. I mean, good Lord, man. To believe that Joe Biden is a legitimate president, none of this would have had to happen. But it did happen, okay? And to believe that this didn't happen, you'd have to believe that Joe Biden is a legitimate president, but he's not a legitimate president. I'm very thankful. I'm very thankful you guys support the show, and I'm very thankful that you are here for the live stream. I'm going to consider putting this live stream out publicly so that people can just watch this and as a 1 week thing. These are important subjects, man. And at some point, people have got to accept all this for what it is. And I think it's a white pill. I mean, people are like, you're pessimistic. You're telling people not to vote. I'm like, no, I'm being honest about the election system. I'm as optimistic as any person in this country. Certainly any person in the movement. Find someone who is more optimistic than me. Find someone who is not freaking out about fake elections. It is amazing, man. Total inversion, again, within the false reality that me telling you everything is okay, our elections are screwed, but everything is okay, and don't worry, we've got this. That is pessimistic, apparently. Unbelievable. Let's keep going. Mark Elias, in his mission to obtain derogatory anti-Trump opposition research, commissioned Fusion GPS, an investigative firm, and its co-founders, Peter Fritsch and Glenn Simpson, and directed them to dredge up evidence, actual or otherwise, of collusion between Trump and Russia. Fritsch and Simpson, in turn, enlisted the assistance of Orbis and its owner, Christopher Steele, to produce a series of reports purporting to contain proof of the supposed collusion. Of course, the now fully debunked collection of reports known as the Steele dossier was riddled with misstatements, misrepresentations, and most of all, flat-out lies. In truth, the Steele dossier was largely based upon information provided to Steele by his primary sub-source, Igor Danchenko, who was subsequently indicted for falsifying his claims. Even more damning, Danchenko had close ties to senior Clinton campaign official Charles Dolan, who knowingly provided false information to Danchenko, who relayed it to Steele, who reported it in the Steele dossier, and eagerly fed the deceptions to both the media and the FBI. This duplicitous arrangement existed for a singular, self-serving purpose: to discredit Donald Trump and his campaign. At the same time, Michael Sussman, in his hunt for damaging intel against the Trump campaign, turned to Neustar, an information technology company, and one of its top executives, Rodney Jaffe, a fervent anti-Trumper who had recently been promised a high-ranking position with the Clinton administration, to exploit their access to non-public data in search of a secret back channel connection between Trump Tower and Alpha Bank. When it was discovered that no such channel existed, the defendants resorted to truly subversive measures, hacking servers at Trump Tower, Trump's private apartment, and most alarmingly, the White House. Remember that? They still had the White House Executive Office of the President hacked and tapped. Do you really think that's never going to matter, that these issues are dead? They are not dead. That matters, and that is real, and that is proven in the Durham investigations. This ill-gotten data was then manipulated to create a misleading inference and submitted to law enforcement in an effort to falsely implicate Donald Trump and his campaign. All of these acts were carried out in coordination with the Clinton campaign and the DNC at the behest of certain Democratic, quote-unquote, VIPs. And they are referencing the Sussman indictment brought this court case, this civil RICO Grande, is referencing United States v. Sussman, September 2021, hereinafter named the Sussman indictment. That's John Durham. While their multi-pronged attack was underway, the defendants seized on the opportunity to publicly malign Donald J. Trump by instigating a full-blown media frenzy. Indeed, the Clinton campaign and DNC, admittedly on a mission to, quote-unquote, raise the alarm about their contrived Trump-Russia link, repeatedly fed disinformation to the media and shamelessly promoted their false narratives. All the while, Hillary Clinton, Jake Sullivan, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, and others did their best to proliferate the spread of those dubious and false claims through press releases, social media, and other official public statements. And give me just one moment here. Oh, how weird is that? It just keeps swirling around even though I'm not using that screen. Jake Sullivan, I don't want to misstate this. I've said it so many times. I believe he is the national security advisor for the fake president, Joe Biden. Yes, that is exactly right. So So Jake Sullivan is currently in the fake administration right now, despite being one of the people involved with interference in our election. And I believe they said on behalf of a foreign sovereignty or in coordination with a foreign sovereignty, didn't they? Oh, yeah, here it is. Oh, no, that was the accusation against Trump, colluding with a hostile foreign sovereignty. Apologies. So where are we? Jake Sullivan. There he is. Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor. Of course, they need him advising national security. Our democracy is going to crumble when all of this actually comes to its inevitable conclusion. The fallout from the defendant's actions was not limited to the public denigration of Trump and his campaign. The FBI, relying on defendants' fraudulent evidence, commenced a large-scale investigation and expended precious time, resources, and taxpayer dollars looking into the spurious allegation that the Trump campaign had colluded with the Russian government to interfere in the 2016 presidential election. The effects of this unfounded investigation were prolonged and exacerbated by the presence of a small faction of Clinton loyalists who were well positioned within the Department of Justice and the FBI. James Comey, Andrew McCabe, Peter Strzok, Lisa Page, Kevin Kleinsmith, and Bruce Orr. And Kevin Kleinsmith is who was convicted, and found guilty and given the slap on the wrist. My fault on that, 100%. That was my misstatement. It was Kleinsmith, not Sussman. These government officials were willing to abuse their positions of public trust to advance the baseless probe to new levels, including obtaining an extrajudicial FISA warrant and instigating the commencement of an oversight investigation headed by special counsel Robert Mueller. As a result, Donald J. Trump and his campaign were forced to expend tens of millions of dollars in legal fees to defend against these contrived and unwarranted proceedings. Justice would ultimately prevail following a 2-year investigation. Special counsel Mueller went on to exonerate Donald J. Trump and his campaign with his finding that there was no evidence of collusion with Russia. And I imagine that plenty of the evidence from the Mueller investigation may be possibly used in these cases in the future. I don't obviously know that for sure. And the Mueller investigation, who knows how tainted by numerous things that would be. Although maybe not, right? Maybe not. The full extent of the defendant's wrongdoing has been steadily and gradually exposed by special counsel John Durham, who has been heading a DOJ investigation into the origins of the Trump-Russia conspiracy. To date, he has already issued indictments to Sussman and Danchenko, among others, for proffering false statements to law enforcement officials. As outlined below, these speaking indictments not only implicate many of the defendants named herein, but also provide a great deal of insight into the inner workings of the defendant's conspiratorial enterprise. Based on recent developments and the overall direction of Durham's investigation, it seems all but certain that additional indictments are forthcoming. In short, the defendants, blinded by political ambition, orchestrated a malicious conspiracy to disseminate patently false and injurious information about Donald Trump and his campaign, all in the hopes of destroying his life, his political career, and rigging the 2016 presidential election in favor of Hillary Clinton. When their gambit failed and Donald Trump was elected, the defendants' efforts continued unabated, merely shifting their focus to undermining his presidential administration. Worse still, the defendants continue to spread their vicious lies to this day as they unabashedly publicize their thoroughly debunked falsehoods in an effort to ensure that he will never be elected again. The deception, malice, and treachery perpetrated by the defendants has caused significant harm to the American people and to the plaintiff Donald Trump, and they must be held accountable for their heinous acts. That, my friends, is really something. And I'm not going to go through the statements of fact. By the way, they break down all kinds. There are all these different subheadings where they tell little individual stories. This is absolutely worth reading. And it's actually, you can skip some of the jurisdiction stuff. That stuff is always really boring. Just assume, fine, they have jurisdiction. Let the courts sort that out. That is a standing issue. That's not like, oh, we have the ability to sue Hillary Clinton in this court because XYZ. That's not, just skip over that stuff and keep going. if you want to read lawsuits quickly. If you want to read every bit of it and understand how lawsuits work, do the whole thing. I'm not the one who makes your decisions for you. But so some of these, the defendant's malicious conspiracy remains active to this day. So that's where they outline how all of this is still ongoing. And this, of course, was in 2022. I'm trying to get to the plea for relief. Oh, the RICO enterprise. Let's read a little bit of this. At all relevant times, the RICO defendants, Clinton, the Clinton campaign, the DNC, Perkins Coie, Elias, and Sussman, constituted an association, in fact, enterprise within the meaning of 18 U.S. Code 1961, sub 4. The members of the enterprise are a group of persons associated together for the common purpose of carrying on an ongoing enterprise. Specifically, the enterprise had a common unlawful goal of dismantling the plaintiff's political career and or impeding his ability to effectively govern through fraudulent, deceptive, and criminal means, including but not limited to falsely implicating Trump, the Trump campaign, and the Trump administration as colluding with Russia. So they continue to make out the fact that the enterprise does exist, okay? So the enterprise has, or at all relevant times had, an organized, clearly delineated, ongoing organizational framework and command structure for carrying out its objectives. Predicate acts of the enterprise: theft of trade secrets, scrolling, obstruction of justice, and then the lawsuit declares damages. The various counts of RICO conspiracy. Conspiracy to commit injurious falsehood. Okay. Injurious falsehood. So not only the actual injurious falsehood, but the conspiracy to create that injurious falsehood. Malicious prosecution. Conspiracy to commit malicious prosecution. Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. So these are all of the violations, the crimes that they are claiming were involved in this enterprise's activities. And then I just want to see if there's a Stored Communications Act. I want to see if there's a plea for damages. Agency against Clinton. Clinton, acting as a principal, used the law firm Perkins Coie and the Clinton campaign as her agents to act on her behalf, to carry out the plot against Trump, to assure that he would be falsely implicated as colluding with a hostile foreign sovereignty. Okay? Congressional elections, all of that stuff can feed into this. I kind of have a feeling that on Friday, which is the deadline for this, we are going to get a document of substantial length updating RICO Grande. And I don't mean to date fag. Maybe that won't happen. But if it does, oh boy. Well, if it does, that'll be what the episode on Friday will be about. I can promise you that. So again, in my mind, there's every justification to be very, very hopeful about where things are headed. Okay. I saw a Rumble rant. We can get to that. eGrab 4. FYI, it is already Georgia election law to count the ballots before certifying the precinct. It has been for years, but the Secretary of State hasn't enforced it since 2020. That is very interesting. We will see what effect that has, how that plays in the future. We have to be open. I've said this before. I am someone who said a great many bad things about Brad Raffensperger and Brian Kemp because, as far as I can tell, they're rhinos. The surface interpretation is they're rhinos. Their actions conform to actions a rhino would have taken over this time. But again, you always have to step back and say, maybe they're just presiding over this. Maybe they're the people who are funneling all of this up to the top. Ultimately, they're just perfectly playing their roles. I don't want to be a person to condemn others. I want to say, I see how this is happening. It could be this. It might be something else. but it damn sure looks like this. Okay. And from that perspective, I still believe that Kemp and Ravensburger are rhinos. I believe the same thing about Ron DeSantis. I believe the same thing to a lesser degree about Greg Abbott. I am not pleased with Greg Abbott, and I've lived in Texas for years. But it is possible that Greg Abbott is doing the right thing that he must be doing. I believe the country overall is probably under military government of some form or another. So I'm not sure how much ability these guys have to do their own thing. It's also entirely possible that they're not really making a lot of decisions, that the corruption is in their past and that they will be held accountable for that in the future. And maybe they are playing along in the right way to have their accountability for what they have done reduced. But, you know, how do you allow a slave trade to operate at the southern border in any state? Sue the federal government. Where was it all? You know, I don't have any reason to think otherwise of these people yet, but maybe someday. I hope that's true someday. I don't want enemies, right? I would love to be wrong about Ben Shapiro and the DeSantis Sims. I just don't really see how that's possible. And again, I know they're waking up the normies. It still hasn't happened yet for whatever reason. What are they going to do when everybody understands that elections are stolen? How is it going to look that they have spent the last 3.5 or 4 years lying about our elections? I don't know how you recover from that. And I don't expect people, by and large, to accept the fact that these guys made $1 million a week or more while lying to them about something they absolutely should know to be talking the way they talk about any of these subjects. I don't know, man. I mean, they have unlimited resources to be right about these things, and yet they are wrong about all of them on purpose in the direction of the regime. Always. How? Bay Theater Dave says, I don't think they will recover. And man, I agree. I don't think that they will recover. Brain Strain again says, I'm not worried about convincing normies. Nor am I. Believing all of this is about convincing normies is harmful to you personally. Okay? If you have normies in your life that you need, RPM says, I think everyone deep down knows elections are rigged somehow. Yes, that is absolutely true. I've said that on the podcast a number of times. If you have normies in your life, in your family, if your wife or your husband is a normie, okay? If your children are normies, if your parents are normies, I understand that you want to get through to them. Having the conversation and arguing with them over the course of years is not going to work. It was never going to work. It hasn't worked. It's not going to work now. They're going to have to experience this jarring incident that this certainly will be, and then you will be there for them at the point they have woken up to that extent, and you can help them along from there once they are seeking your help and they are open to your words. Okay? Continuing to fight with people and send them links and sources is not it. That's not awake, and it's not helping those people. And, you know, I've had to separate myself from people who I loved for my entire adult life or even longer. And when those people come back to me, then we can we can begin a relationship again. But I can't just forgive the behavior from before. So the only way for that to happen is for them to approach. I'm not going to send them the election results and be like, hey, haha, you were wrong. Except for, you know, obviously a few people whose relationships I don't care about at all. Just so that they can understand that I see them. Yeah, okay, let's continue with some of the, I'm saying again a lot, and it's really pissing me off now. I thought I was doing well in the first half or so. Maybe not. I don't know. You would be the judge of that. Let's go to the Substack. These are the comments. American Wings says, when you were in LA, did you ever help celebrities manage their PR and image when a scandal broke out? If so, what level of panic do you think is rippling through LA now in light of the P. Diddy scandal? And what were some of the things you did to help them? Okay. So I have to answer this in two ways. In the company that managed celebrities and brands and athletes and whatever, I was doing business development in that company. So I would offer the company's services to celebrities, to brands, to athletes, etc. And then eventually, obviously, people will begin a referral process, and that outgoing business begins to become an incoming business that you're just then fielding and managing, okay? Other parts of the company were focused on doing the management of the celebrities and brands. So it was not me directly managing accounts, and I want to be very, very clear about that. I was also not the final say on what accounts would be pumping out. We would talk about strategy. We would talk about how things needed to be presented or what might not play well. And then there would be a brainstorming process about creative ideas for a person or for a brand. And then that person would be brought in so that their creative ideas are mixed in with that. Their reactions are given, and then we can determine a strategy to move forward. Then a strategy is built and a strategy is executed. Okay. So me directly handling scandals and controversies, I would maybe occasionally weigh in on things and give my input or feedback, but that was not my primary role there. Now, that said, apart from that business, there's some people that don't pay attention to any of this stuff. And so there's like 5 total household names in the world. But if you're a person who watches a lot of movies and watches a lot of television, watches award shows, pays attention to Hollywood in general, you're on social media, very much in that normie entertainment culture, pro sports, major music, pop acts, etc. And I was very, very knowledgeable about all of those things and deeply embedded in all of it. So if you encompass all of those fields and talk about people who would be common household names, like a band, and you know all the members in that band, do you know household names? So I want to be clear on what I'm talking about here. But if I knew 500 or 1,000 of those people, I don't think that would be overestimating the number. It could be more than that. I don't know. I've never really thought about it that hard. So over the years, knowing that many people of that kind, some of them would tell me about the problems they were having, or if they said something stupid, or if someone was mad at them, a business relationship had soured, a relationship was going badly, and they said, how do I handle this? And like, what are people going to think about XYZ? That's just a conversation that I'll have, and I'll give my feedback. And when you are out in social environments with these kinds of people, and 5 or 10 or 15,000 people, who certainly more than 5, I had 5,000 numbers in my phone, but 10,000 or 15,000 people in Hollywood who are acquaintances, who you'll see regularly, who you'll end up in small talk with, that may become a bigger conversation, and you'll hear all sorts of rumors and gossip and how this person thinks about something, how that person thinks about something. There are a lot of opportunities to learn how things work. And so you automatically have that as a background. And the PR aspect and the image-oriented aspect is understanding that as part of that background. And so you can then relay it in terms of normal advice. And, you know, if someone in the chat asked me, hey, my business is going through this, how would I respond? I could tell you how a PR agency would respond, or at least give you an idea. I don't know how every agency, of course, would respond. So let me retract that slightly. But I could certainly answer that question from a range of publicists' points of view. All right. When a scandal broke out, what level of panic do I think is rippling through LA now in light of the P. Diddy scandal? And what were some things I did to help them? So I think I've answered the first question and the third question. What level of panic do I think is rippling? My best answer to that would be to go by what I said on the podcast on Monday. I proposed the example of the house party. And I don't know that Diddy's parties were like this. I know that very, very high-end house parties are like this because I've been to plenty of them. There are exclusive areas within exclusive areas. There are different sorts of guests at the party. There are different tiers of guests. And if you're throwing a party, then you actually have to consider these things. And I threw many parties. There were the absolute VIPs, the host and all of their best friends, right? You got to know those people. You got to take care of them. The host will say, whatever those people need, you got to get them whatever they need. Because I'm not going to be around the whole time. I want them to have what they need. You need to figure that out. Cool. Then there are the guests of those close friends. Maybe they put somebody on the list and those people are out with the general public, the kind of general admission and attendees. And then there are all those general admission attendees. Some of them, first, there are the people that they're the kind of high profile people that some PR agency would have invited and brought. And those people get taken care of. They might be introduced to that inner circle of people. And then there will be, they'll weigh that out. Are you coming into the exclusive area? Are we going to bring you? And a lot of times that happens. A lot of times it doesn't happen. And then there's everybody else who's just invited or there. The hookers go to the exclusive area when it's time for the hookers to go to the exclusive area. But by and large, you can assume that 80+% of the people at that party don't really have much of an idea what's going on in the exclusive area and have no access to it. So it's entirely possible that the worst thing in the world happened at an event I attended or even worked at, and I have absolutely no idea of it. And neither do any of the guests, except for the people directly involved. And as long as that circle stays tight, then no one else will know. And maybe rumors will leak out and people will hear about them. But I kind of went through this scenario in depth the other day. That's the best I can answer it, to be honest. Panic level at 11, maybe it is, right? I don't know. I have had friends from Hollywood, one in particular who doesn't live there anymore, text me the other day with the real sense that something was going down. And the best way to tell this, man, you guys might be able to read this better than me because I'm not on Instagram. But if you see a whole bunch of celebrities talking about this issue, and then you see a whole bunch of other celebrities on that same tier of celebrity not talking about the issue, those are the scared ones. That is what I would guess. And maybe they're just scared because they're not going to work again if they start speaking out about things. There is plenty of that in Hollywood. In fact, that's what the biggest problem was in 2020 as they pitched the whole COVID narrative and then the stolen election in Ukraine and Israel and all the rest of it. Okay, so I think I've covered the bases on that. You can let me know. American Wings also says, don't you think it odd that most of the so-called polls designed to shape public opinion not reflect it? And much of the Trump and down-ballot candidates state that the top concerns of voters is open borders, escalating crime, and the economy, whilst humanity itself is at risk in what's going on around the world. My God, we almost all literally died last Saturday. Had Biden given the go-ahead to escalate in Ukraine and the Middle East, it would have been game over, and it might happen again. Now, I'm going to pause there because I don't agree with any of the second half of that paragraph, okay? We didn't almost die. We didn't come anywhere close to dying. Biden does not have the authority or power to give the go-ahead to escalate in Ukraine or the Middle East. And if that happened, we also would not almost literally die. So there is no game over there. That's just not going to happen. Open borders, and it doesn't mean that we're not going to be told stories about it happening, okay? But it's not going to happen. Open borders, escalating crime, and the economy is almost irrelevant. Well, I don't think so. I think that those are actually, oh, you mean they're irrelevant in relation to these? Yes, fine. Or is this just another example of the stranglehold the fake media has on the people? And there you have it. That is your answer. Yes. And while I'm at it, the utter nerve of Biden and Blinken or whoever is pulling the strings to call for peace while they are funding the war on both fronts, fair enough. It is because, well, they're certainly funding the narrative of the war. Okay. And it's always important to keep these things separate because funding a narrative of the war with controlled opposition at this sophisticated a level means that we believe there is a war. An actual war happening is not required here. And again, we might just be seeing reenactments. It's becoming very clear that throughout the world for the past 60 years, America is the aggressor in all the conflicts since World War II, which has never ended, just moved. Yes, yes. Methinks we are going to get our comeuppance real soon. Maybe. America as the aggressor, I would have some quibble with that. We are the heavy. I think it is better to think of us as the heavy. We are also, in some sense, the labor class that supplies all of the money and economic activity to the rest of the British Commonwealth to be able to serve as the heavy and wage war on their behalf to keep their colonies in check. And that is what we do. We are the enforcement arm. We are the labor arm. And for that, our currency is then the global reserve currency. And all of that is meant to cumulatively keep us in line. American Wings goes on. At the beginning of last week, the Biden regime in the UK were set to announce they were going to give Ukraine permission and the means to lob long-range missiles into Russia. We've talked about this a bit on the podcast, something Zelensky has been pleading for. Then Putin makes a statement, if Russia is attacked by Ukraine, which is really NATO, which is really US, that they will have changed the dynamics of the conflict, and we will consider that an act of war against Russia by NATO. The Western EU alliance and the US, make no mistake, we will respond accordingly. Yes, yes, yes. Yes, I agree with you about all of the Putin stuff. That was a rant and not so much focus on the election. I agree with you. With the sarcasm about let's keep focusing on a fake election. Obviously, we actually went through something like that earlier in this episode, so I'm going to leave that there. Danamite says, and just in the interest of time, no disrespect, please. Concerning the Ralph story, I find it odd that a penned letter was discovered describing Ralph's future failure of assassination. Of course, that is odd. How was it written that Ralph admitted his failures months before it would be attempted? Of course, with the caveat that the letter is real and not written by handlers. Thank you, Chris. By the way, I believe the Ralph narrative as told to us by the TV is total BS. The information concerning the Las Vegas shooter's brother being accused of basically the same things as Ralph's son is telling and smells of a crap narrative written by poor screenwriters. And perhaps, I think maybe it's written by amazing screenwriters, which is why Donald Trump did the interview with Cheryl Atkinson that came out the day before that story was released, when she has dealt with the planting of that kind of evidence on devices. So all of those things line up pretty well as far as I'm concerned. The letter could be written months in advance of the thing happening, because the thing happening as it's told to us on the timeline in which it's told to us could just be a reenactment. Like the story we were told last Sunday, you guys have to understand, does not have to be true. Okay. Doesn't matter how Trump talks about it. Doesn't matter how your favorite TV characters talk about it. Doesn't matter if everybody analyzes all the details released by the mainstream media, and they are released by the mainstream media, if not the DOJ that no one trusts. So I know it's not a comfortable thing to think about that, but you got to think about it. And when you think about one, you got to think about two. Ian Masters' thought process on everything involving the election was mind-blowing. I can't grasp how anyone could be such a child-brained standard issue villager when it comes to this topic, knowing everything we now know. His comments about the Electoral College were wild, and it just goes along with the commies' push to get rid of it. If the EC is ever discarded, we are in trouble, assuming elections were free and fair. Okay, yes, I think that I said most of that, so yes. Okay. RPM asks, what caused you to see the light? Man, this is stuff that I have talked about many times. First and foremost, the media being totally wrong about the 2016 election. They said it was 98% Hillary Clinton was going to win, and then Trump won. By the way, this year, the country will believe that 98% chance of Trump winning by a lot, and the TV will tell us otherwise. I've been saying this over and over again. That will be getting the hose. If people want the hose, that's what the hose looks like. And hopefully it's the happy version of the hose where it is such a wide margin that no one could ever believe it. So many votes that no one could ever believe it. So many obvious problems with the process that no one could ever believe it. But I think that's how it's going to go. And by the way, I think that's the most optimistic way it could go. That presents the best outcome. Everyone knowing that elections are fake and everybody votes for Donald Trump. Everybody, not votes, but everybody supports Donald Trump and MAGA. That is the best possible outcome. We're trying to win an information war, not a fake election. And with that, I am going to bid you all adieu. I will be back on the podcast tomorrow at the same reasonable time on the same reasonable podcast network. I don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you about a pandemic and Joe Biden will never be president. And that's the end.
Well,
what?
You know who I am, don't you?
Well, you ain't Fiona Apple, and if you ain't Fiona Apple, I don't give a rat's ass.
Ah!
Can we stop this cruel game and allow the boy to keep one shred of dignity? For God's sakes! I can't stand to see him in all this pain! You vicious bastards! Let him move in with you! Is it so bad to see somebody happy? So just let him move in! For the love of God, let the boy move in with you! Good Lord!
And I will not let you down.
We do a little trolling. It's called We Do a Little Trolling.
What? In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening for free and would like to support the show, the best way to do that is by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can find the info stream over on Telegram at t.me/veryreasonable. The merch site is cancelcouture.com, and for all my other links, you can visit linktree.com/imyourmoderator. And I'll see you soon. Down on the range.